Hello, my name is Steve Goodwin, and you are watching video number 101 of my ongoing series in which I am trying to find the world's best performing anchors. Now today we are going to compare two pivoting fluke anchors, this 20-pound Danforth high tensile and a 10-pound Fortress FX16. Now the Danforth anchors were developed back in the 1940s. They're made of steel. The Fortress anchors came later, I believe 1980s, and they are made of aluminum. They are designed to compete directly with the heavier steel anchors, and the number 16 in this anchor's name is meant to indicate the size of steel anchor that it is alleged to replace. Unfortunately, I don't have a 16-pound Danforth. I just borrowed this 20-pounder from a friend. But I think if we make a slight correction, given that they're different sizes, we should be able to get an apples-to-apples comparison from the test data. Linear dimension-wise, the Danforth is about 10% longer and wider, but surface area of the fluke is closer to the 20% difference, and that's also the difference between a 16 versus 20-pounder. So I think if we use a 20% difference, or let's just say if the Fortress can perform to within 80% of this anchor, then I would say their claim of a Fortress FX16 replacing a 16-pound Danforth, I'd say that's an accurate claim. If it does, it's a real win because it doesn't weigh 16 pounds, it only weighs 10. Another benefit of the Fortress is they do disassemble. They come right apart. You just undo these two bolts. And another key difference with these anchors is they have two angle settings for the shank. And what I mean by that is the angle formed between the fluke and the shank, the normal setting is 32 degrees. However, you can take the anchor apart and put it back together with the stock in a different hole, and you can end up with a 45-degree throat angle. And it is designed to work in very soft mud. And for the first time, I've tried that soft mud setting, and we'll get a chance to see if that works or not. So for today's test, we're going to look at these anchors in three seabeds: a soft mud seabed, a clean sand seabed, and a sandy mud seabed. These anchors were designed to develop very high straight line holding power, and that's what I'm going to look at. There'll be no veering and no resetting, just high thrust straight line pulls. I'm using a mostly rope rode. I think that's more typical for these kinds of lightweight pivoting fluke anchors. Folks are most likely to use a predominantly rope rode. I've obviously done lots of other testing with heavy single tooth style anchors, and for that I typically use more chain. The amount of chain I've selected comes straight from the Fortress website. They say to use between 6 and 12 feet of chain, or 6 feet of chain for every 25 foot of water depth. Now the test today occurred between 25 and 33 feet. I've chosen 12 feet of chain. So it's just verbatim. Also the scope of 5:1, it's right out of the Fortress book. So I didn't see any information on the tie-down engineering website. That's the folks that build the Danforth anchors. So yeah, they both get the same parameters. Let's go see how they stack up against each other. Okay, we'll get things started in the soft mud seabed at Scow Bay. We are in 25 feet of water, and I'll mention that this road attaches basically right at waterline. So when I give the water depth, that is also the effective height of the road. The road ends up being 125 feet long. It's 12 feet of 5/16 chain. The balance is 9/16 nylon, and the scope is 5:1. And we'll notice here in the early stages of this pull, the motion is quite slow. I think the anchor is still diving at this point. But at some point at the higher thrust levels, the speed increases. The camera tether does become captured, and it drags the camera and float under the seabed. And for this portion where we can't see anything, I've got the playback speed up to 8 times. And I'll mention that at the final power setting of 1,150 pounds, the boat speed from the top side was about a half a knot. Wasn't sure I was going to get that one back. We did not bend it, but yeah, that was incredibly hard to remove from the seabed. Here's some footage of my anchor washdown procedure. Note the anchor skimming along behind the boat. I found these great leaps the anchor makes quite comical, a bit like a two-headed barracuda chasing after the boat. If you try anything like this yourself, be darn sure that the anchor cannot contact the seafloor or any other object, because it would be a real disaster. Okay, with things all cleaned off, I wanted to give the Danforth another try. So it's a repeat of the previous test, but I've got the camera tether lashed at the boat end of the 12-foot chain. And this will no longer have the problem of plunging into the seabed. Unfortunately, we don't get to see anywhere near the anchor, but it's no doubt very well buried at this point. We'll see that the amount of chain that is buried is completely stable. There's about a foot left there, and as we drag along here at the highest power setting, it's stable. The anchor doesn't rise up, doesn't descend, so I believe this would continue indefinitely. And again, it's a tremendous amount of force required to dislodge the anchor. The road is nearly vertical and the boat's driving ahead, so lots of force to remove that anchor. So now we're on to the fortress anchor, and to me it looked like in the initial part of the pull, things were very similar amount of motion, but at the higher thrust settings, the fortress was not as firm. I measured it at about 800 pounds. This anchor started to have a motion of 1/2 knot, and it was at the highest setting at 1,150 pounds that the Danforth moved at that same speed. So for this test, I'm going to call the Fortress at about 70 or 80% of the holding power of the Danforth. Only, I don't know, 3 feet of the chain had mud. The Danforth had more like 10 feet. I gave the Fortress another try, and it was the same result. At 800 pounds, it started dragging briskly. So again, the holding power of the Fortress appears to be about 70 or 80% of the Danforth in this soft mud seabed. It's the Fortress FX16 with the shank set at the 45-degree setting, or the fluke to shank angle at the soft mud 45-degree setting. As stated, I have the fluke to shank angle of the Fortress reset to the 45-degree angle setting. This pull started off with kind of the expectation it would dig right in, so I was pretty brisk, and it indeed did not set. It would not hold 1,000 RPM, which is only about 65 pounds of thrust. Gave it plenty of opportunity there, and nope, no significant holding. Okay, it failed to develop significant holding power. There was nothing in that mud. No shells, no sticks, just mud. I'll clean it off and try it again. Okay, this is take 2 for the Fortress at Scow Bay with the flukes at the 45-degree angle. First try, no significant holding power. This time I was much more gentle in the initial part of the set attempt, but the results were exactly the same. So my conclusion is that the soft mud that Fortress has in mind for using this shank fluke setting must be a very, very soft mud, something that's more like soup. Same result. No significant holding. It would not hold 1,000 RPM. Now we have relocated over to the new clean, loose sand seabed. As I've stated in other videos, this sand is quite loose. Doesn't have any binder in the first, say, foot or so, but I've noticed when anchors come up, they sometimes have some small clumps of material stuck to the fluke, which indicates that as we travel down in the substrate, there's perhaps more cohesive material. I would have liked to have found a seabed that is just 100% pure, clean sand, but that is probably not possible in my area here. This is probably as clean as it gets. It does behave very differently than my other seabeds, so I think it's a valuable addition to my test site repertoire. In any event, the anchor does really well. Its total motion is maybe 3 or 4 feet, and at the final moments of the max pull setting here, motion comes very close to a stop. It was really quite solid. Okay, it was solid as a rock from the top side at full power for the whole minute. Now it's the Fortress turn in this loose sand seabed. And in the initial thrust settings, I'd say things are very, very similar to the Danforth. Could still see just a little bit of the shank there, and then it finally disappeared. So I don't think it buried quite as far initially, but it was holding nicely. And then somewhere around the 700-pound mark, it starts to move, and it never stops. It just keeps moving. And in fact, the anchor eventually lifts. We can now see heaping material kind of at the top of the screen. You can see where material is being pushed upward. And soon we'll see, there it is. There's the shank reappear. So the anchor has risen up again, and it releases. So similar to the soft mud, the Fortress has about 70 or 80% the holding power at best of the larger Danforth. Now we've moved over to the final seabed for this video, which is my standard sandy mud seabed. Danforth digs right in initially, just immediately. And notice that the anchor set at a particular angle, and then the direction of my pole was off from that, maybe 20 degrees or so. So right off the bat, the anchor did have to negotiate a veer, and it does so perfectly. Anchor stays buried and develops tremendous holding power. It doesn't move far at all. it held the full thrust, 5,000 for 30 seconds, no apparent motion. And now the Fortress's turn. In case I didn't mention it, the fluke to shank angle did get reset back to the 32-degree normal angle. And initial set looked fine. Looks like the anchor almost fully buried. And then when I added the first power setting of 220 pounds, the anchor released and drug continuously. In fact, it failed to reset. No indication it was going to reset at all. And from what we can see, it just has a blob of seabed packed into the flukes, and the presumption is that would continue indefinitely. Now again, I'm using the precise guideline for scope and chain. This is just as given by the Fortress company. So I went ahead and retried it, thinking maybe there was an anomaly on the first go, but no, it was the exact same result. And I've tested this anchor in this seabed many other times with same scope, and even at 3.5 to 1, but with heavy chain. And of course, heavy chain has the effect of reducing scope, but this is the first time I've ever tried to do high holding power tests with minimum chain and the minimum recommended 5 to 1. Here's a third try for the same test, 5 to 1 scope, 12 feet of chain, and it was the same exact result. Maybe it held a little more. I think, yeah, on that one it held 220 pounds and released at 280, which is far, far below what this anchor is capable of. Okay, gonna try the Fortress again, but this time in 25 feet of water. Same road though, 150 feet. So it's gonna be 6 to 1 scope, straight line pull, sandy mud, short chain road. So as stated, I've increased the scope to 6 to 1, and that made all the difference in the world. So apparently the 5 to 1 scope minimum recommendation is really on the ragged edge of what works for this anchor. Just that small bit of lowering of the angle of pull just turns it into a great performer here. It did hold the full 1,150 pounds of thrust. Okay, let's talk about the results. First of all, does a 10-pound Fortress FX16 perform as well as a 20-pound high-tensile Danforth? I say absolutely not. In no way would it compare with this heavier anchor. But does a Fortress FX16, would it do as well as a 16-pound Danforth? And I'm going to say it's close. It's certainly not better, and whether it's as good is marginal. I think at times you'll probably have similar holding power, but we saw in the case of the sandy mud that penetrating was a real issue there until scope was increased. So again, it's probably similar in some cases, but in no way is it better. Another question would be, is a 10-pound Fortress FX16 better than a 10-pound Danforth? And I think there we can all agree it is. It very likely has more holding power than an equal weight Danforth. What do you think is hindering this? Well, of course, there's the weight, and that's certainly going to be a factor on initial setting. As the anchor's diving in, though, I can't really see how anchor weight is going to affect much. I think the weight of all that seabed is going to be far more important than the few pounds difference in the anchor itself. But one glaring difference in the structure is the width of these shanks. The weaker aluminum had to be wider in order to get the necessary resistance to bending. And that's just harder to push into the seabed. And we saw very clearly that this anchor just does not dive as deeply as the Danforth. So I would say if you don't mind the little extra weight and you don't need to disassemble your anchor, then by all means, keep your high tensile Danforth. That is truly a wonderful performing anchor. If you're like me, I tend to row and walk out my Fortress anchor from time to time. I've even rowed it out in an inflatable kayak, and the lightweight is a real plus. I actually don't need to disassemble this. This anchor does fit in my bilge fully ready to go, and that's kind of nice. Having your anchors fully rigged and ready is pretty handy in case of an emergency. I think we showed very clearly that the fluke angle setting of the Fortress anchor should be left in the normal 32-degree position. The anchor just does not work unless you are in the exact seabed that they are intending. And again, it's just a guess. I'm assuming that they built that 45-degree angle for some sort of extremely soft, perhaps soupy mud bottom. Now, before we sign off, I want to show you what came in the mail last week. 2 anchors from Mantis, 2 anchors from Viking. 2 days ago, I was out on the water for 8 hours testing the 2 smaller anchors. It's a 17-pound M2 and a Viking 10, and there's some surprising results coming our way. I haven't looked at the data completely, but I would expect a bit of a reshuffle in my list of greatest performing anchors. Big thanks to these 2 manufacturers for having the confidence in my testing and, more importantly, the confidence that they have in their own product. They know I do not treat anchors gently, and if there is a problem with any of these, I will show the world. So thanks a lot, Viking and Mantis. Also, thank you viewers for watching and sustaining this effort of mine. And even bigger thanks to the folks that have chipped in their cash. If you want to join them, it's links to Patreon and PayPal down in the description. As always, anchor safely. So long.